Hello and welcome to Brave Souls Rewind, the show where I 200 older characters so you don't have to. Today I'll be covering the Lost Agent version of Rukia, who as far as design goes, is probably my second favorite Rukia after manga Rukia. This Rukia came out in the Lost Agent series, where we got a lot of good characters and also some not so great characters. It's time to see which one of those two she falls under. Now as always, I started off with the normal attack damage build. Now keep in mind, I actually didn't have her at 200 before I decided to do a rewind on her, so I had no idea what kind of ability she had. All I knew is that I really liked her strong attacks, so I figured I'd do a rewind on her. As far as her actual attack stat though, it's not that bad. I mean, it is kinda low, but in terms of hybrid characters back when she came out, it's actually pretty average, and it dealt a pretty decent amount of damage. She does have a plus 20 bruiser, and she did have a hollow killer going for her, so that definitely helped. With that said, I did find that her normal attack doesn't have the best range, but the speed and damage are good, so I'd say this build is viable, especially if you use her strong attacks to knock the enemies over, which I didn't end up doing much for this build, but it was an option. That said, you shouldn't use this build in anything other than single player. You can still get by in inheritance zones and drop-it zones assuming you don't auto, but if you go in any of the co-op rooms, I feel like the enemies will just overwhelm you with their numbers. If she had a better range, it'd be a different story, but she doesn't, so here we are. Next up we have the strong attack damage build, and it's because this character's strong attacks look cool to me that I decided to do this rewind. So I was pretty excited to see how much damage these can actually do, considering she doesn't have frenzy and I knew that going into it. She does however have a higher SP than attack, and she's got a plus 40 berserker. She's also got debilitating freeze on all of her attacks, which would have been better with frenzy since they would hit more, but it still managed to help every now and then. The result of this build was actually decent damage, and most of the time the strong attacks took out the enemies in one shot, the only exception being some of the stronger enemies, and even then you can just pick them off with your normal attacks afterwards. Rukia also had a boosted strong attack recharge link, which did shave off a few seconds of waiting for her strong attacks to come back. So yeah, this build is viable, but much like the last build, I wouldn't necessarily take it to anything co-op, since in this case the range is there, but even though it's enough damage to take care of enemies in single player, it may not apply to some of the tougher co-op missions. Next up we have the strong attack recharge build, a build that I would say is only slightly better than the last one, if only for the fact that you can spam your strong attacks which have decent range, and it increases the chance of inflicting debilitating freeze. As far as actual damage though, it really isn't all that much. Some of the strong attacks are still enough to take care of some of the weaker enemies, but the tougher ones are definitely going to take multiple hits to take out. Luckily Rukia has her own boosted link, so this isn't necessarily a problem. Plus if you have a slight increase in your attack, you can also use your normal attack. This build would be much better if you threw in a Frenzy Yoruichi or Frenzy Byakuya as one of the links, but I typically don't like to do the rewinds with Frenzy characters as links, because not everybody has those. So yeah, I'm also gonna say this is a viable build, but much like the last two, I wouldn't take this in any co-op. Finally, we have the hybrid build, a build I was excited to see because I know that Rukia already has a boosted recharge link, so giving her an extra one of those, and an increase in both normal attack and strong attack damage, seemed like a recipe for a really fun character. And I was right. The strong attack still dealt a decent amount of damage, partially because I increased her SP, and another part is because I actually increased her attack, since the attack stat also goes into effect when calculating the amount of damage a strong attack deals. Plus on top of that, they were coming back relatively quickly due to the two boosted links, and the normal attacks were still dealing a decent amount of damage despite not having the best range. In the end, I actually like this build the best, and it's a build I would actually take in co-op, but nothing harder than a 5-star raid. I would definitely take this build in single player inheritance zone, provided that some of the enemies were hollows and I had somebody else for the other killer. And that's it for Rukia. She's actually a really fun hybrid character, though I do think there's room for improvement in her range and both her normal attack and a little bit on her strong attacks. Even though they were all viable builds, I can only go as far as giving her a B, since most of the builds will only really be effective in single player.
行くぞ天剣わしらの力を見よ北上天元妙
Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know what other characters you want to see in a rewind.